Here is Immortal Moments for explanation. Friends, like videos and subscribes to our channel. Swallowed Star 2 Land of Origin Part 55 Explanation. So let's start our explanation. The formless rules descended for just a moment before receding. Luo Feng looked at the palm of his left hand where a rule imprint had appeared. This imprint could connect to the rules of infinite space, allowing him to check his reward points information and exchange them for resources from the treasure trove. Earning reward points in infinite space is indeed difficult, Luo Feng mused. Repelling spiritual beings only awards maximum points the first time, which is 1 point. Each subsequent time, the reward decreases. I heard that after 100 times, each time awards less than 0.01 point. Infinite space highly values the forging of new great Daos, Luo Feng thought. And it places great importance on spiritual will. This is a treasure land left by the ancestor. It's apparent that his selection for descendants primarily focuses on forging new great Daos and on spiritual will. Perhaps how far one's cultivation journey can go is related to these two aspects. Luo Feng speculated. Standing at the ancestor's heights, he valued not the comprehension of existing great Daos but the creation of new ones. Could this be related to something beyond the ultimate realm of God King? Luo Feng pondered, then smiled, one step at a time. The ultimate realm of God King was still very far from him. Across the entire land of origin, there were only a few at the ultimate realm of God King, about whom Luo Feng currently had no detailed information. Let's take a look at the treasure trove first. Through the rule imprint, Luo Feng began to access the treasure trove's resources, coming into contact with a vast amount of information instantly. Luo Feng had 101 points, allowing him to view resources information that didn't exceed 101 reward points. These reward points really last, said Luo Feng as his eyes lit up upon checking. Luo Feng first looked at the inheritance information. Ranked first in the inheritance, the 9 Realms of Extinction, first realm, perfection level inheritance, required 100 reward points for exchange. This is a perfect inheritance feasible across all origin worlds, corresponding to the first realm of Godly King. As a perfection level inheritance, it's actually impossible for Godly King level cultivators to fully master it, but even slight success is already remarkable. Danger reminder. The entry threshold for the 9 Realms of Extinction, first realm is extremely high, requiring surpassing the Godly King's will to attempt cultivation. Otherwise, one will be assimilated by the great Tao of destruction origin of this world. What is this? An inheritance of the first realm of Godly King level requires surpassing Godly King's will to attempt cultivation. Luo Feng found it unbelievable. And it also says it's practically impossible to fully master. This was left by the ancestor. The ancestor dared say that no Godly King could fully master it. There must be a reason. The requirements for merely entering, with respect to spiritual will, show just how terrifying this inheritance is. Feasible across all origin worlds, theoretically perfect. Luo Feng sensed the hidden messages in these words. Ranked second in the inheritance, the 10,000 Transformation Divine Body, the first 2 volumes, intermediate grade inheritance, required 100 reward points for exchange. Corresponding to the second realm of Godly King. Luo Feng carefully reviewed it and saw only 2 perfection level inheritances. Ranked 6th in the inheritance, the Temporal Walker, first volume, perfection level inheritance, required 90 reward points for exchange. This is a perfect inheritance feasible across all origin worlds, corresponding to the first realm of Godly King. The difficulty of entering this inheritance is exceedingly high. Of the over 10,000 exchanges to date, only 3 have managed to enter, all of whom surpassed the ultimate realm of God King. Danger reminders. 1. Surpass Godly King's will to attempt cultivation, otherwise there will be the disaster of becoming lost. 2. Comprehend all branches of the time primordial Tao and origin Tao of space before attempting cultivation. Forcing comprehension can lead to the calamity of temporal and spatial annihilation. 3. This Tao involves the fusion of time and space, requiring extreme talents in space-time paths, otherwise misfortune abounds. Why does it speak of boundless misfortune? Luo Feng mused, looking somewhat puzzled. These 3 danger reminders, especially the third, put it ambiguously. Not having extreme talent means boundless misfortune. No wonder, despite being a perfection-level inheritance, it required fewer reward points than 9 realms of extinction. It seemed significantly more dangerous. These theoretically perfect inheritances, even stating that it's impossible for Godly King level to fully master them, then who created them? Luo Feng secretly guessed that it might be some extremely terrifying beings, achieving incomprehensible realms to create these inheritances. Because they are too perfect, resulting in extremely high entry requirements. Just by looking at the treasure trove, Luo Feng already noticed the difference between the inheritances exchanged between the two ancient countries and this infinite space treasure trove. The inheritances exchanged by the two ancient countries were left by two ancestors. They were not as high class as those in this infinite space treasure trove. But to exchange for anything in this infinite space treasure trove required a lot of reward points, which were extremely difficult to obtain. Luo Feng suddenly brightened and quickly continued to read, discovering a familiar inheritance. 8 tribulations life form, first calamity, superior inheritance, required 5 reward points for exchange, corresponding to the first realm of Godly King. This level of inheritance, divided into 8 calamities, is relatively easier for cultivation and is considered superior among the Enlightenment lineage inheritances. Superior inheritance. Luo Feng had already discovered it. This treasure trove's collected inheritances were categorized into intermediate inheritance, superior inheritance, special grade inheritance, and perfection inheritance. In the flame-wind ancient country, among the inheritances cultivated without external aid at the first realm of Godly King, 8 tribulations life form, first calamity is considered the highest grade. However, here, it is only deemed superior. Luo Feng studied for a long time, carefully understanding all inheritance information, and summarized some points. Perfection-level inheritances reach theoretical perfection but have extremely high thresholds. It is practically impossible to fully master them, and just mastering a small part is already outstanding, Luo Feng concluded. Special grade inheritances also have extremely high thresholds. It's possible for those at the Godly King tier to fully master them, but the probability is extremely low. Maybe not even one Godly King in an entire origin world can cultivate to a higher realm. Just entering is considered difficult enough. Superior inheritances are suitably wide-ranging. Intermediate inheritances are typically cultivated by Godly Kings. Lower than these? Not worth mentioning. Inheritances like the Heart Shadow sect and the Duan Dong River lineage, which are merely left by the first realm of Godly King, are scarcely worth mentioning. Luo Feng, within this treasure trove, had taken a liking to one particular inheritance. World Life Form, Part 1, Special Grade Inheritance, requires 30 reward points for exchange, corresponding to the first realm of Godly King tier. This inheritance requires simultaneous cultivation of the Great Tao of Life Origin and the Origin Tao of Matter. Reminder, all 6 branches of the Great Tao of Life Origin and all 8 branches of the Origin Tao of Matter must be fully comprehended to gain entry. This inheritance involves treating one's own life form as a world in cultivation, with the ultimate goal of transforming one's life form into a source world, hence the high potential. The 10-directional world form I am pursuing now has similarities with this inheritance. My formless and intangible can substitute some capabilities of the Origin Tao of Matter. Perhaps I could try cultivating it? Luo Feng was very tempted. Because the philosophy behind this inheritance was very similar to his transformation method. Luo Feng thought for a moment. Regardless, it ultimately encompassed all 6 branches of the Great Tao of Life Origin, and just contemplating this aspect would not be too much of a loss. Moreover, it should greatly benefit the improvement of his transformation method. Exchanged. Luo Feng immediately decided and chose to exchange for this special grade inheritance. A large amount of information was transmitted to him. World Life Form was created by an old friend of Yuan. This inheritance was divided into 3 parts, corresponding to the first realm, the second realm, and the ultimate realm of Godly King, these 3 levels of content. As for higher level content, it must be personally taught by Yuan's old friend. Excellent. As soon as Luo Feng received the inheritance, he was exposed to a massive amount of information. The creator of this inheritance had attained inconceivable depths in the research of life forms and source worlds. This inheritance, including the triune form, the 10-directional world form, the 24-aspected form, were just part of the many forms. The integration of life form and matter was particularly profound. This is what a special grade inheritance is, Luo Feng sighed internally. It was incredibly powerful. Although he possessed that transformation method, compared to the complete origin Tao of matter, it seemed weak. Luo Feng faintly realized that following this path would eventually lead him to a significant bottleneck. In the early stages, using the transformation method could indeed compensate for the requirements of the origin Tao of matter, allowing the cultivation of world life form, but in the future, I suppose I will still need to use 8 tribulations life form and world life form as aids to forge my own path, Luo Feng thought. Subsequently, Luo Feng sat cross-legged in the forest and began to study this newly acquired special grade inheritance in detail. Although the infinite space guides its entrants to forge their own paths, Luo Feng was keenly aware that he was only at the primal chaos realm, without true mastery over even one branch of the origin Great Tao. Forge a Tao? It could accumulate slowly, but he did not stress over it. Keep in mind, within the infinite space, most were godly kings, and there were even beings at the emperor level. They had profound accumulations and could attempt to forge their own paths. This spiritual impurity. Every one of Luo Feng's avatars felt some pollution in the spirit. It was the lingering effect of severely injuring a spiritual life form in the infinite space, as various desires and prayers of countless creatures echoed within Luo Feng's spirit. Hiss 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 tilde tilde tilde. Luo Feng, in his usual state, was deploying the destruction refinement method. With his own spiritual will as the foundation and the intent of all things and all forms of destruction, he employed the destruction refinement method, creating a world-destroying grindstone, aiming to completely erase his own spiritual power. His own strength, to erase himself. Thus, no matter how much Luo Feng's spiritual will improved, this heart-refining method remained effective. Hiss hiss hiss. In the past, when using the destruction refinement method to purify his spirit, Luo Feng always felt progress was painfully slow. But now, affected by a great deal of spiritual pollution, the effect of erasure was notably greater. Luo Feng also felt pain, as if bits of his soul were being peeled and crushed, though this was just an illusion brought about by the pollution. This signified the terrifying extent of severe spiritual pollution. Indestructible through myriad calamities. Luo Feng suddenly gained a deeper understanding of the calamity beast diagram. In this treasure spot of infinite space, where the will and spiritual beings collided and became polluted, then erasing this pollution was itself a purification of the spirit. Each purification was another form of spiritual cultivation. Elder Yuan truly had deep intentions, guiding us to purify our spirits and forge our own paths. Luo Feng felt fortunate to have received this opportunity, which might seem ordinary to the imperial clans of the two ancient countries. Yet, Luo Feng felt that this opportunity brightened his forward path significantly, and based solely on this opportunity, he was even more confident about reaching higher levels in the land of origin. Eliminating all spiritual pollution indeed makes the spirit feel more ethereal, and the will more condensed. Luo Feng was secretly astonished, as just one purification noticeably increased his perception of improvement. The results were quite good, apparently. The destruction refinement method was more suitable when combined with spiritual pollution. Subsequently, Luo Feng began to focus on comprehending this newly acquired special grade inheritance. At the border of the flame-wind ancient country, Xiangjie City. In a quiet room of the garrison mansion, Luo Feng sat cross-legged with a jug in his hand, taking a sip. The jug contained the Shengbing precious medicine, a cultivation aid he had purchased, made from godly king exotic beast materials. After consuming it, Luo Feng felt his soul become much cooler and clearer. It's worthy of being a special grade inheritance. Luo Feng had spent tens of thousands of days to superficially research this special grade inheritance, world life form. Simply the guidance within the inheritance makes these 30 reward points very worthwhile. This inheritance was created by an old friend of Yuan. The creator's strength was too high, far surpassing the creators of 8 tribulations life form and extermination of 72 blades. Just a few words within the inheritance made Luo Feng realize some key points on the path of cultivation. Life within the braided cage has the origin Great Tao as a reference, so the difficulty of cultivation is relatively low. But outside the braided cage, cultivation is like groping in the dark, blazing one's own trail. The difficulty of cultivation is unknowably higher. Therefore, from a negligible state, one must enhance one's wisdom. Any aspect of a cultivator can be enhanced. Physical body, movement technique, wisdom, insight, soul, will. There are ways to cultivate all aspects, but insight is the most ethereal among them. Luo Feng quite agreed with this point. Insight is very ethereal. Among countless cultivators, it's generally augmented by consuming rarities like the primordial crystal spirit fruit, which nourishes the soul, and to a certain extent, can be considered an improvement in insight. Or when the spiritual will becomes strong. Once the spiritual will strengthens, insight indeed improves. Or by specifically cultivating the soul. The path of the soul is the toughest path, but a fundamental improvement of the soul's essence indeed brings about an elevation in insight. Or if the physical body becomes extremely strong, it will nourish the soul, and make thinking more swift, which is also helpful to insight. But these are all indirect methods. How far one can journey on the Great Tao, insight is fundamental. How to improve insight? I have a method: use the intricacies of a lower realm to create high-level secret techniques. Luo Feng also fully understood the creator's thoughts. For example, the Trinity form. If one intuits the 6 branches of the Great Tao of life origin and uses the complete 6 branches, one could easily create the Trinity form without any difficulty. But if one attempts to create the Trinity secret technique with merely the intricacies of the pinnacle of primal chaos realm, the difficulty skyrockets immediately. This process of trial can gradually lead to a slow elevation in insight. According to the teachings of the creator of the inheritance, in cultivation, one should not deliberately pursue breakthroughs. One should continuously attempt to create high-level secret techniques from a lower realm state. Create 1, 2, 5, 10. When accumulated to a profound depth, even without deliberate breakthroughs, one day it will naturally happen. In the cultivation of the Godly King tier, there is clear guidance from the origin Great Tao. It is the best opportunity to refine one's insight. Once one surpasses the Godly King level, one is forced to grope in the dark. Many cultivators are used to having the guidance of the Great Tao. Suddenly groping in the darkness, progress becomes difficult. Not to mention completely jumping out of the braided cage. This expansive inheritance opened Luo Feng's horizons. Luo Feng's mindset had changed. Previously, he indulged in the primordial crystal spirit fruit, always yearning to master a branch of the Great Tao and breakthrough in realm. Now it seems, what's crucial is to train the ability to grope in the dark, to train insight. The breakthrough of the Great Tao realm is naturally occurring. My cultivation progress is already swift, there's no need to rush. I'll try, with primal chaos layer Tao intricacies, to create Godly King level secret techniques. Luo Feng thought, those who manage to create secret techniques and achieve transcending the primal chaos realm are such mighty beings. Luo Feng's Trinity form was a Godly King level secret technique. But he had only created one so far. I can also research materials from primordial bloodline creatures, study their life forms. Instantly, an avatar of Luo Feng, through the subdued world's entrance, headed to that subdued world. This world under garrison, named Xiangjie, teemed with life forms of primordial bloodlines at the primal chaos layer. Primal chaos realm strength signified that primordial bloodlines were already at their thinnest. If they degraded further, they would begin to lose the characteristics of a primordial bloodline. Huff, huff, huff tilde tilde tilde, a colossal creature resembling a rock sculpture lay prostrate, its breath causing storms. Its body sleek, its immense cloven hoofs rested there, with its head pillowed atop them. Suddenly, a man in black appeared nearby. The colossal creature suddenly opened its eyes and gazed at Luo Feng with its yellow pupils. A cultivator? The colossal creature looked at Luo Feng with wariness and hostility. What are you doing in our world? Get lost pronto. Throughout its years of growth, it had often seen cultivators enter this world, Occasionally, some primordial bloodline creatures were taken away, never to return. Boom! Luo Feng extended his hand, and a billion black rivers surged out, forming into a gigantic palm that clutched the colossal creature's neck. He then lifted the vast creature into the air. "Let go of me, let go." The colossal creature was in a panic, looking at Luo Feng. "You taking me away? I know, you cultivators always take away a batch of primordial bloodline creatures. Those taken away, they all died, haven't they?" Indeed, that was the case. The primordial bloodline creatures taken away would have their bloodlines refined again and again, until they perished completely. They were bred and cultivated with the sole purpose of refining diluted versions of primordial bloodlines. "I need to select some primordial bloodline creatures to take away." Luo Feng's gargantuan black river palm still clutching the creature's neck, said leisurely, "However, as long as you give me some of your body materials, I can spare you. Give some materials and you'll let me go." The colossal creature being held by the neck, feeling the stark difference in strength that left it powerless against Luo Feng. Even in Xiangjie, the most perfect primordial bloodline creatures of the primal chaos layer could, by instinct, only contend with ordinary godly kings. Still, they were no match for Luo Feng at that moment. "Yes, some materials. You must ensure not to destroy these materials with a mere thought. If you destroy the materials, I'll have no choice but to take you with me," Luo Feng said. "The Flame-Wind ancient country will have envoys to guide the creatures. But these creatures with primordial bloodline can never discern whether they are the envoys themselves. In their eyes, all beings from outside their world are cultivators." "Okay, I'll give it to you." The massive creature, facing the insurmountable gap in strength and without any resistance, willingly bowed its head. "Very good." Luo Feng nodded in satisfaction. "I'll select some materials." According to Luo Feng's request, a claw blade, a piece of skin membrane, a small segment of bone, some blood. Although there were many types, the amounts added up to be very minimal. The massive creature could fully recover in just a few breaths' time. "Just for such a tiny amount of materials you'll let me go?" It secretly felt fortunate. Luo Feng then regularly began collecting small amounts of materials within the garrisoned world. As far as the Flame-Wind ancient country was concerned, as long as these creatures with primordial bloodline were not killed, and the extraction of the primordial bloodline wasn't delayed, they wouldn't care how brutally they were beaten. Luo Feng might deceive, beat, or even directly capture them into the Star Tower. Capturing one creature into the Star Tower also struck fear into the other creatures with primordial bloodlines in that world, making them more compliant in handing over their materials. Of course, Luo Feng would encounter some obstinate creatures that, no matter how much they suffer, would not bow their heads and refuse to let Luo Feng study even a single drop of their blood. In that case, Luo Feng could only keep them imprisoned within the Star Tower indefinitely, which also served to maintain his infamy in this world, letting other creatures with primordial bloodlines know that refusal to comply with demands for materials would result in being taken away. Of course, if one day the envoys from the Flame-Wind ancient country came to inspect, Luo Feng would simply release the imprisoned creatures back into the world. As Luo Feng understood, envoys from the Flame-Wind ancient country would typically only come to inspect once every 1,000 eras or even more seldom. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Time flew swiftly for cultivators immersed in cultivation and research. Era after era relentlessly passed by. The outside world believed that Luo He, who, by creating his own secret technique, became the first to transcend the primal chaos realm, with his strength, would likely stir up some trouble to garner sufficient benefits for himself. To their surprise, Luo He became very low-key. He no longer took on any missions, didn't get involved in any conflicts, and even in Huyang City, Xiangjie City, and Chu Capital, few cultivators were ever able to meet Luo He. In the blink of an eye, Luo Feng had been the garrison commander of Xiangjie City for 100 eras. In the Thunder Ancient Country, Zhuoshan City, this city belongs to Zhuoshanjin, the newly emerged transcendent of the primal chaos realm from the Thunder Ancient Country. As Zhuoshanjin had fully joined the Flame-Wind Ancient Country and transcended the primal chaos realm, he was naturally granted a city. Primordial bloodline truly holds countless secrets. Mountain-sitting guest sat in a quiet room, appearing unremarkable as ever, his aura fully withdrawn, primordial bloodline is like the most perfect weapon, secret treasure, filled with endless mysteries of the great Tao. Mountain-sitting guest was also constantly studying the makeup of the primordial bloodline, exploring the mysteries of the great Tao within it. As he uncovered the potential of the bloodline, his mastery steadily improved, naturally reaching the transcendence of the primal chaos realm. For normal cultivators, transitioning to cultivate the primordial bloodline would bring about a metamorphosis in their strength. The weak primordial bloodline that I have come in contact with, even its remnants of spiritual will, are somewhat troublesome. The eyes of mountain-sitting guest faintly glowed red before he suppressed it. This will can be suppressed but can't be eradicated. The remnant spiritual will, too high in stature. Mountain-sitting guest suddenly flipped his hand and produced a circular token. This is the latest intelligence from the master of the Sha Kingdom. A piece of information suddenly came through. Mountain-sitting guest's nemesis, led by the three monarchs of the Sha Kingdom with the Emperor of Qian Kuan at the forefront, is also the true ruler of the Sha Kingdom. In mountain-sitting guest's view, his disciple Luo Feng's talent was terrifyingly brilliant, and the other two monarchs pose little threat and would not be difficult to remove in the future. However, the leading Emperor of Qian Kuan was more troubling. After all, the Emperor of Qian Kuan was a second-realm godly king. Even an emperor-tier figure wouldn't dare to claim they could completely kill him. His hatred ran deep into his soul. His kin, his wife were all too weak, lacking the ability to perform the reincarnation secret art and doomed to be completely dead. He naturally yearned to completely kill his enemy. The master of the Sha Kingdom has allied with many friends, ambushing the monarch of Yu country in the secret place Qianhe, forcing the monarch of Yu country to venture into the depths of Qianhe. The monarch of Yu country is in danger of having his true body fall. This piece of intelligence slightly changed mountain-sitting guest's expression. The master of the Sha Kingdom and the monarch of Yu country had always been at great odds. This time, the monarch of Yu country really suffered a heavy blow. The monarch of Yu country also transitioned to cultivate primordial bloodline. Countless resources have been poured into his body. If his true body perishes, his strength will be greatly diminished in a short time, thought mountain-sitting guest. The monarch of Yu country, if dead, wouldn't truly be gone. But without the true body and relying on a revival host to recover, he would need to buy a new primordial bloodline and new resources to cultivate again. The situation between the Sha Kingdom and the Yu Kingdom could completely change. Mountain-sitting guest was somewhat anxious. Judging by many actions of the master of the Sha Kingdom, he must have joined a powerful force, enabling him to repeatedly and quietly gather several godly king second-realm beings to strike together silently. Strong in his own right, with quick assistance from companions. The more information the mountain-sitting guest collected, the more he understood the difficulty of seeking vengeance. I wonder how my disciple is doing now. Mountain-sitting guest knew that relying on himself, there was no hope. Reaching an invincible level in the first realm of Godly King with the help of the primordial bloodline was already quite an accomplishment. But that level was still weaker as compared to the Emperor of Qian Kuan. Not to mention entirely exterminating him. His only hope lay with his disciple. My disciple, with a universe so vast, a godly body so tremendous, has surpassed the history of the land of origin. He was able to master the Lai Yuan technique at a young age. After several decades in the land of origin, he is now the first transcendence of the primal chaos realm. However, over the last 100 eras, there has been little information about him. Mountain-sitting guest was also not very clear on Luo Feng's situation, and he had not planned to meet and acknowledge Luo Feng. In his plan, he would only recognize his disciple when Luo Feng's strength was at least comparable to the Emperor of Qian Kuan. Xiangjie City had become much more prosperous than it was 100 eras ago. The incident where the indisputable first in transcendence of primal chaos realm, Great Saint Luo He, was punished to garrison Xiangjie City for 10,000 eras, had fermented over time. Even ordinary eternal true god families had heard of it. Small factions, major family branches, and eternal true god families willing to settle in Xiangjie City were growing in number. Many trades between the two ancient countries were also carried out here. For one, it was a border city, holding a geographical advantage. Secondly, it was safe. The bigger the trade, the more important safety became. Slaughter and plunder were common occurrences in the land of origin. But with great St. Luo he stationed in the city, who would dare to cause trouble here? Moyu General. Moyu General. Leading several trusted aides, Moyu Qingyang arrived at the garrison mansion, where the guards at the entrance showed great respect. Nowadays, Moyu Qingyang wielded tremendous power in Xiangjie city. More than 10 eras ago, after reaching eternal true God through the bloodline cultivation system, both Luo Feng and the primordial ancestor intended for him to manage some internal affairs of the city. The primordial ancestor was the deputy garrison commander. Under Luo Feng's command, the primordial ancestor represented him within the city. Moyu Qingyang held the position of inspection general, taking care of the many trifles within the city. Moyu General. Inside the garrison mansion, the servants showed great respect upon seeing Moyu Qingyang. Everyone knew he was the garrison's only direct disciple. Moyu Qingyang made his way unimpeded. He soon saw a figure sitting leisurely on a high building in the distance and immediately hurried over. Master. Moyu Qingyang arrived at the base of the pavilion and respectfully saluted. Come up. Luo Feng glanced at his disciple below and smiled. He was satisfied with this disciple he had taken in. Although Moyu Qingyang was less talented, under Morosa's meticulous teaching, he barely became a true god of void space after great difficulty. Even Morosa decided to let him switch to the easier bloodline cultivation system, and with focused resources, he had now also become an eternal true god. Being less talented was not important, character mattered more. As Luo Feng's only direct disciple in the land of origin, Moyu Qingyang had never misbehaved by using his master's fame. This was why even the primordial ancestor kept delegating authority to him. Moyu Qingyang soon ascended the pavilion and saw his master. His master appeared ordinary sitting there, but through Moyu Qingyang's law source sensing of heaven and earth, he could feel that many operating laws were subtly forming around his master as the center, synchronously operating. Qingyang, what brings you here? Luo Feng looked at his disciple with a smile. Disciple has spent a long time with Zhong Yunj of the Zhong family. We've discussed it, and I plan to visit her parents in the Zhong family. Afterward, we will also go together to Huyang City to visit my father, Moyu Qingyang said respectfully. Oh? Have you decided on that, Zhong Yunj? Luo Feng asked with a smile. Cultivators did not necessarily need a Daoist couple. Many lived their entire lives devoted solely to cultivation. A Daoist couple was more a companion of the spirit. Choosing a Daoist couple was a very cautious matter. Disciple has decided, Moyu Qingyang nodded. Luo Feng nodded, although that Zhong Yunj is from the royal family, she is very distantly related to the Wind Chapter God King. As my direct disciple, it is sufficient for you to marry her. The Wind Chapter God King was a first realm godly king, a guest elder god king of the Flame Wind ancient country, with considerable accumulations. His existence was nearly indistinguishable from that of the ancestral god of the Snow realm. Innumerable were the offspring of the royal family, and although Zhong Yunj was an eternal true god, he was also a branch of the main lineage of the royal family. However, too many generations separated him from the godly kings, so his status was not particularly high. Luo Feng immediately summoned Morosa. Whoosh! Morosa appeared in the pavilion in a flash. With a smiling face he asked, "Did you want to see me, master?" He also noticed Moyu Qingyang, who promptly paid his respects. The youngster Qingyang has taken a fancy to a girl from the Zhong family named Zhong Yunj and is preparing to visit her parents, Luo Feng said with a smile. I know, Morosa knew much more than Luo Feng. I've advised him that cultivation should be his focus. Affairs of the heart will only distract him, but this time he is set on that Zhong Yunj. Since it's a formal visit to the Zhong family, you'll go on my behalf, Luo Feng told him. After all, you two are of the primal chaos realm. Your presence on my behalf will be enough of an honor for the Zhong family. More than a dozen eras ago, after Moyu Qingyang became an eternal true god through the bloodline cultivation system, Morosa, with Luo Feng's consent, quickly publicized his strength, revealing that he had broken through to the primal chaos realm. Luo Feng, as the foremost in transcending the primal chaos realm, had a newly promoted primal chaos realm cultivator by his side. This was quite a common and inconspicuous matter. After Morosa publicized his primal chaos realm strength, Luo Feng also formally appointed Mo Yu Qingyang his direct disciple of Morosa. Naturally, Luo Feng understood the affection between Morosa and Mo Yu Qingyang. "All right, I will go on behalf of the master," Morosa immediately agreed. "Thank you, second master," Mo Yu Qingyang said as well. "You're my disciple after all." Morosa was still quite happy to do this. Suddenly, Luo Feng stretched out his hand and lightly tapped. A droplet of water flew from the tip of his finger and landed in the palm of Mo Yu Qingyang, turning into a water droplet mark that then vanished from sight. Mo Yu Qingyang was a bit puzzled. Luo Feng said, "You will be heading to the Zhong family, and afterwards, you'll go to Huyang City. The journey is long, and if you encounter any dangers, this mark can be activated with a single thought to protect both of you thoroughly." Morosa's strength he could display was very limited, so Luo Feng still prepared a backup plan for his disciple. "Thank you, master," Mo Yu Qingyang expressed his gratitude. Looking at this scene, Morosa muttered to himself, "My master is simply transcendent of the primal chaos realm, whereas I am a true god king. But now, I can hardly see through his methods." "Go now," Luo Feng nodded. Mo Yu Qingyang then respectfully took his leave, while Morosa remained in the pavilion. "Master, shall I go alone?" Morosa looked at his master. "Remember, control the strength you show. Your limit is 5 to 6/10 of the strength of Marquis of Zhujiang," Luo Feng instructed through telepathy. "Understood," Morosa nodded in comprehension. "Then I will go and prepare to set out with Qingyang." Luo Feng nodded. A disciple's marriage was something Luo Feng preferred not to get too involved in. Love was also the most splendid journey of his disciple's life. The treasured place, infinite space. Spiritual beings were entrenched there, while Luo Feng was at a distance. Their spiritual wills collided, fought, and slaughtered. Luo Feng did not use the Lai Yuan technique but instead used some methods he had pondered over on his own, allowing his mind to be tainted by chaotic thoughts during the confrontation. "That's about it," Luo Feng thought after a moment of struggle. All of his spiritual will condensed into a rolling star that came crashing down, directly crushing the vast spiritual power of the spiritual being. This crushing instantly obliterated more than 90%. Only a small amount of the purest spiritual power regathered. "The 9th calamity has passed." A voice rang out in the consciousness of the tentacled creature, and an invisible force descended, nourishing its remaining spiritual power and rapidly restoring it to full strength. The tentacled creature was thrilled at this moment. It had finally passed through. The 1,000 calamities, each one very difficult. This 9th calamity involved being obliterated by Luo Feng over 1,000 times until the infinite space finally recognized that its 9th calamity had passed. Luo Feng's expression changed slightly. How did it recover so quickly? "We have clashed over 1,000 times, but we will not meet again," the tentacled creature said to Luo Feng before disappearing into thin air. Luo Feng pondered, "Not meet again? It seems it's about to disappear." Some of the native creatures in this infinite space were spiritual beings. Though they occupied a fixed place and could be continuously destroyed, only a very few reward points could be obtained with each defeat. The more times they were repelled, the more the reward points diminished, like the recent repelling that awarded Luo Feng only 0.001 points. Generally, after repelling a spiritual being over 1,000 times, it might disappear, never to appear again. The area Emperor Ming had delineated for me contained 3 spiritual beings. In 100 eras' time, 2 of the spiritual beings have already disappeared. The remaining 1 awards so few reward points for each repelling that they are negligible. Luo Feng thought to himself, "It's time to leave." After all, the reward points generated by this place were minuscule, and their effect on honing his spiritual will was diminishing. During this 100 eras, I constantly honed myself combining the Lai Yuan technique with spiritual contamination, although my spiritual will has also improved somewhat. Still, I can't rely on the Lai Yuan technique alone to eradicate a spiritual being. These spiritual beings had an extremely strong vitality. Just as it seemed that the spiritual power of the opponent had been annihilated in an instant, remnants of spiritual will soon gathered again. No wonder it is said that, even with the spiritual will of the ultimate realm of God King casting top spiritual will secret techniques, there is only hope of eradicating a spiritual being. Whoosh! With a single step, Luo Feng was already a great distance away, flying hundreds of times faster than when he had first entered the infinite space. After just a few steps, he had already reached the edge of Emperor Ming's dominion. Your Majesty! Luo Feng greeted respectfully. With the protection of Emperor Ming, he was able to cultivate peacefully in the infinite space for his first 100 eras. A century's growth had given him the confidence to stand his ground in the infinite space. Oh, Luo He, Emperor Ming's will enveloped Luo Feng, somewhat surprised. Your spiritual will has grown significantly over this 100 eras and is not far from the ultimate realm of the God King. Thanks to your Majesty's benevolence, I have been able to cultivate peacefully in the infinite space and have made such progress, Luo Feng replied. For a normal cultivator, the growth of spiritual will is extremely slow, or even stagnant, sometimes even regressing. Even with the Lai Yuan technique, Luo Feng spent most of his time using the Great Destruction heart refining technique to constantly hone his spiritual will. Normally, it would take tens of thousands of eras to achieve the growth he had now. He first encountered spiritual contamination in the infinite space, being contaminated over and over again, each time refining away all impurities with the Lai Yuan technique. Constantly refined. After a century of such refining, Luo Feng's gains were naturally substantial. But the further it went, the less this method helped. The area granted to me by your Majesty originally contained 3 native creatures. Now, 2 of them have disappeared, and the last one awards very low reward points, Luo Feng said. Oh? You must have killed them many times, Emperor Ming replied. I have killed each of the 3 native creatures over 1,000 times, Luo Feng said. Generally, after more than 1,000 times, it's indeed possible for the native creatures to completely disappear, typically being moved to some distant part of the infinite space, Emperor Ming explained. Luo Feng understood. Moved somewhere else? With the vastness of the infinite space, the likelihood of encountering those 2 disappeared native creatures again was very low. I also gift a domain to the Imperial clansmen early in their cultivation, and after that, they need to fend for themselves, Emperor Ming said. I also came to bid farewell to your Majesty, Luo Feng said. I'm ready to set out and establish my own territory. If you can achieve the ultimate realm of God King's will in the primal chaos realm, that would be quite impressive. The infinite space values this greatly and will grant rewards, Emperor Ming said. I've painted some calamity beast diagrams in my spare time in the infinite space, so I'll give you one as a gift. As he spoke, a black and red scroll appeared out of thin air and flew towards Luo Feng. Even without unrolling it, Luo Feng could feel the powerful will contained within it. This is different from the common calamity beast diagrams. Luo Feng immediately understood that the calamity beast diagrams sold outside might have been painted by Emperor Ming in his early years. Luo Feng immediately received the scroll with respect. You must have seen Shadow of the Catastrophe Beast. But the shadow is different from the painting of the beast, Emperor Ming said. The painting is the image of the beast in the heart of the artist. Each artist has a different image in his heart. Thank you, Your Majesty, Luo Feng said gratefully. As it turned out, his master, Emperor Chu, and Emperor Ming did not get along well, but even so, Emperor Ming took such good care of him, and Luo Feng was naturally grateful. Soon after, Emperor Ming withdrew his consciousness. Luo Feng respectfully performed a bow and flew off, beginning his solo venture in the infinite space. This episode is end here.